Councillor.
Good afternoon, Madam Presiding Officer. Good afternoon to the other members of the House. And a special greeting to those who have joined us in the viewing gallery and those who may be listening via the various social media options. It is certainly a pleasure this afternoon, Madam Presiding Officer, to stand before you and speak about the processes that are needed to develop Tobago. It is really an honor to have the opportunity to speak critically about what we really need to do on this capital of paradise. The development that we've seen so far has been slow at times. At other times, it seems to be going backwards. But we must take every day as an opportunity to do something fresh, to do something new, and I'm glad we are here doing this today. Madam Presiding Officer, I do not intend to be lengthy, as I intend to raise only three main topics. I will speak very briefly about what those of us on this side of the table sees the role of the government, and there may be some similarities in how we view the role of the government. I will also speak about two specific methods that we are recommending used to help assist in that kind of development that we're hoping to see on the island. Madam Presiding Officer, many of us who got into politics did so because we genuinely want to help people. We genuinely want to see the lives of the people who we serve better. It is important, however, that we understand that the role of government is that to support those individuals. But it is probably more important that we understand that there are times as government we need to step back just a little and ensure that we do not overstep and that we do not compete with some of the same individuals who we are trying to assist. Therefore, Madam Presiding Officer, the role of government is to complement and not necessarily to complete. We need to provide, Madam Presiding Officer, the basic infrastructure that allows our citizens to live comfortably in their everyday lives, but we need to also provide some of the basic infrastructure that's needed to allow this business community to thrive. Yes, that includes some of the simple things that we traditionally think of governments doing, which include, paving the roads, which coincidentally happens election time, creating drains, having electricity, having water, providing hospitals, providing schools. Those types of things are what we traditionally think of government's responsibilities. But as it relates specifically to helping our communities develop, governments must also be responsible for setting up some of the rules and regulations that are needed to create the minimum standards for some of the goods and services that we are asking our private citizens to provide. For example, Madam Presiding Officer, for those who may be interested in food processing, because it's an easy example for us to think through the steps, the government needs to be very, very clear on what the minimum food safety standards are. That is a basic minimum requirement. In addition to identifying those basic standards, though, the government needs to also ensure that it facilitates, not necessarily provides specifically, but facilitates the process by which those who are in the private sector can reach and maintain those standards. And it may mean working closely with private sector to create the certification process or to create the labs that we may need to test the foods. If it is not readily available, then the government must do its due diligence to ensure, Madam Presiding Officer, that it provides those situations, those mechanisms. So it provides the testing and it provides the certification that is needed. Madam Presiding Officer, this is critical because one of the things we as the Progressive Democratic Patriots frequently hear when we are chatting with people, particularly in this food processing area, is that we know that Tobago has the best when it comes to food. We are sweet hand. We can all agree with that. And the things that we produce are indeed some of the best. We know that. When our friends and families come to visit, they tell us that our items are indeed the best. However, when those entrepreneurs venture to have those items move from off of just the shelves in Tobago to the shelves maybe in Trinidad and to the shelves internationally, they recognize that they come across a major, major hindrance, which is we do not have on the ground as a set standard the food safety, whether it is HACCP, whether it's an ISO, whatever it is that's necessary to get those foods on the market internationally. We hear that it is extremely costly to get the necessary testing done. And that is why I was so happy when I heard the members speak about having Kariri come over, because one of the things we understand is that, yes, that testing that Kariri does is extremely expensive, but I would like to put it on record that the testing that Kariri does is not a one-off testing. And I think many of our entrepreneurs believe it is you do it once and that's fine, without recognizing that it is something that needs to be repeated next year and the year after and the year after that. So even though they may have incorporated the cost for testing once, they did not really think that they needed to do it over and over and continually for their products to stay on the market. Therefore, Madam Presiding Officer, it would be great if we set up something right here in Tobago, possibly with THTI, since they have a well-defined kitchen system, to work with Kariri to determine what is the best method of providing that kind of service continually on the island for those entrepreneurs that are interested in having their products tested and having them rolled out continually. Yes, we know that we have some of the best pepper sauce and Beneball, but if we cannot get them onto the market, the world does not know that. Madam Presiding Officer, the second issue that I would like to touch on is one that relates to how states sponsor community development projects. Because how those projects are funded and managed influences how the communities are able to benefit from them directly. Currently, Madam Presiding Officer, what happens, as you may be full aware, is that each division within the Tobago House of Assembly gets funding to execute projects throughout the entire island under the purview of that division. Now, that may work perfectly for some of the larger scale capital projects. But unfortunately, because of how the THA is set up and how the Executive Council is set up, that kind of funding structure does not allow, Madam Presiding Officer, the average man on the ground to really be actively involved in the management or in deciding, for example, what projects they want done. Therefore, Madam Presiding Officer, we've heard complaints on the ground all the time that there may be simple projects that can be executed that really are the priority of the community. and those projects do not get completed or don't get executed because it just didn't come up. Or the flip side happens, Madam Presiding Officer, where we have projects that may not be the priority of the community, or projects that may not be what the community thinks is in its best interest. And those projects get done, those projects get funded, those projects get executed. Madam Presiding Officer, the PDP, the Progressive Democratic Patriots, made a recommendation during the 2017 election in our PDP-THA election mandate on page 26, where we speak about community funding. And it says, what we recommend is changing the budgetary policy to allow for standard budget allocations for every community. Community councils will be created and equipped to lead in the management of these community projects. The funding will be housed in the division with responsibility for community development, but the governing rules will be established within the division with responsibility for finance. In other words, Madam Presiding Officer, what the PDP proposed then is, in simple terms, to allow each community or to give each community an allocation. And let's just say it's $1 million. So each community knows at the beginning of every fiscal year, there is $1 million sitting, waiting for that community to use. No, Madam Presiding Officer, we are not going to just hand over the $1 million to anybody. As I said, it will be sitting within the division with responsibility for community development. What we will do, Madam Presiding Officer, however, is ensure that those community councils are revived and recreated, and ensure that they are equipped with the necessary technical capacity to identify, Madam Presiding Officer, what the projects of that community needs, to identify which are critical, which are priority, and then to allow them, Madam Presiding Officer, to execute those projects. So, for example, if the Richmond community decides that it wants to create a water park within the Richmond Beach River area, Madam Presiding Officer, the Richmond Community Council would have an opportunity, have access to that $1 million, if that is the figure, to execute that project, Madam Presiding Officer. Using that model, we know that the politician, the area representative for that area, does not have to go cap in hand begging any other person for monies to do project in their area, because that money is already allocated for that community. What it also does, Madam Presiding Officer, is improve the general capacity of the community by ensuring that within each community, there are people who have real hardcore technical skills to run and manage projects. What it also does, Madam Presiding Officer, is ensure that there is equitable distribution of the resources of the island. Therefore, those people who do construction, who are from within the Richmond, Belgarden, Glamorgan area, would be the ones benefiting from the construction that is happening. It means that the hardware in that area would be the one making the money from that area. It means that the lady who sells juice and pie has a specific place to go and sell her juice and pie because this construction is happening in that community. Madam Presiding Officer, it means that each individual community sees the development that is happening in its community, has a direct say in what development happens in its community, and can see every single year what is happening, how it was spent, where it was spent, and feels that it is actively a part of how the community develops. Madam Presiding Officer, that was just one of the many ideas of the Progressive Democratic Patriots throughout the last election season. And dare I say, Madam Presiding Officer, that when the people of Tobago gives us the opportunity to manage this Tobago House of Assembly, that will be one of the things that we execute. Madam Presiding Officer, the final thing, and as I said, I was going to be very, very brief. The final issue that I would like to raise helps with community development, yes, but it also helps with the expanding of the private sector within Tobago. And I would again go to the mandate of the Progressive Democratic Patriots, page 13, where we discuss financing. And it includes the Tobago House of Assembly taking up its responsibility to create or to establish what is known as a Tobago National Development Bank, whose main stakeholders, of course, are the THA, the Tobago cooperatives, and the Tobagonian diaspora. Madam Presiding Officer, let me be clear. The PDP was very precise in how we envisioned this development bank, and we were very specific in the name that we chose. We said specifically that it would be a Tobago National Development Bank, because we are speaking directly to the nation of Tobago. And let me make that clear. This is not to be confused, Madam Presiding Officer, with the island of Tobago. It is not to be confused with the residents of Tobago. It is not to be confused with the nation state that is known as Trinidad and Tobago. But, Madam Presiding Officer, we specifically say Tobago National, because as outlined in the Oxford Dictionary, the word nation can mean a large body of people united by common descent, history, culture, or language. This means, Madam Presiding Officer, that when we speak about this National Development Bank, we are speaking and we are including Tobagonians, people who know in their heart and soul that they are Tobagonians, but may not be residing on the island of Tobago. We are speaking about individuals who may be very successful in Trinidad, in the Caribbean, in the United States, or anywhere else. And they now have an opportunity, because they are going to be stakeholders within this development bank. They have an opportunity to be investors. They have an opportunity to contribute directly. And those who are benefiting will be those Tobagonians who are here who need the kind of support that a development bank provides. And as we are talking about a development bank, Madam Presiding Officer, we know that development banks tend to be a little more user-friendly. They tend to be a little less rigid with their borrowing rules and requirements. According to the World Bank, in a 2017 blog, Madam Presiding Officer, it includes the new role of the General Development Bank within this era as doing several things. And I would only highlight a few of those things, Madam Presiding Officer. And that is to give us an idea, give us context of why we think this development bank is what is needed to assist our local entrepreneurs to get to the level that we know they can get to. Some of the roles: 1, it leaves the funding of commercially viable and quote-unquote safe projects to the traditional private sector banks. So it allows those who've probably been established for a while, who can meet all of the requirements of the traditional banks, to go to those banks. That's fine. But it focuses on less commercially viable initiatives that still yield significant development results. So those that may not be able to meet the hard core requirements of the traditional private sector banks can go to this development bank and do what is necessary because the requirements are not as rigid. We all know about the Agricultural Development Bank and the way that functions compared to other banks. 3, Madam Presiding Officer, it allows us to find innovative ways to crowd in private capital, including by developing credit guarantee schemes, credit enhancements on the capital market instruments, or private or matching private equity funds. That's an option. It assists in supporting the development of an ecosystem of factoring, leasing, and micro, small, and medium enterprise finance companies through the provision of stable funding resources via credit lines. And these are resources that may not be available to these MSMEs within the traditional banking system. It provides the private sector, and this is critical, with incentives to take more responsibility for operations and maintain long-term finance for infrastructure projects. So when we are asking the private sector to come in and to invest, it's because this development bank can also provide incentives to those private sector individuals. And the final thing, Madam Presiding Officer, is that it solves many of our public-private coordination problems, which increase the social returns of investment projects in cases where the social returns exceed the private returns. And the private returns aren't sufficient to really induce investment. What this means, Madam Presiding Officer, is that because we know of the social good that will happen as a result of this project getting off the ground, even though the benefit, the financial, the profit that we would normally look at would not come immediately, this gives an opportunity for those projects to get off of the ground because we know of the social benefits that they would have. Simple projects that fund programs geared towards women, children, those kinds of projects that we know could assist an entire family to lift up, but may not be as profitable on paper. Those are the kinds of projects that a development bank can assist with. Right. Madam Presiding Officer, the Tobago National Development Bank will revolutionize the financing options for individuals and companies that have fantastic ideas, but who will not necessarily meet the strict requirements of the current financial institutions that give business loans. Granted, Madam Presiding Officer, some of these same financial institutions would happily and readily give our Tobagonians $100,000 to purchase a car or to keep a harvest. But they will not give that same $300,000 to the same person if they tell them it is going to start a business. But Madam Presiding Officer, that's another issue. Madam Presiding Officer, the Tobago National Development Bank will be an ideal vehicle for sourcing funding from successful Tobagonians outside of Trinidad and Tobago who are looking for that link, who are looking for an opportunity to give back directly to the development of the island. Madam Presiding Officer, that bank would also help in ensuring that, let me step back a little bit. One of the things that development banks also work very closely with, it is because they understand that the technical capacity of some of the people who borrow from them are not as great as they should be. They could spend some time creating or ensuring that that capacity is built. Technical capacity in areas of product development, marketing, and so forth. Madam Presiding Officer, as I wrap up, the Minority Council and the Progressive Democratic Patriots firmly believes that if the Tobago House of Assembly seriously thinks about these issues, plans and executes strategies that are rooted in science and take into consideration the local culture of our Tobago population, we can indeed equip our local entrepreneurs with adequate resources to identify, explore, and penetrate new markets in order to maximize profitability and bolster the island's economy. And we can also expand the private sector through the development of the entrepreneurial class. The THA, though, Madam Presiding Officer, has to be one with vision, one that understands the needs of Tobago, one that understands how economy works, and one that is willing to put Tobago and Tobagonians first for that to happen. Madam Presiding Officer, the people of Tobago have given the People's National Movement 18 whole years to fulfill those promises. And it has failed miserably. It is time, Madam Presiding Officer, for the people of Tobago to give the Progressive Democratic Patriots, to give my colleagues and I an opportunity to execute these and many of the other projects that we have so well thought of. Because this is what, Madam Presiding Officer, Tobago needs to really become the developed status that it needs to be. Madam Presiding Officer, Tobago, it is time. Thank you.